Imagine this. You're at home, surrounded by the people you love the most, feeling safe and secure, when suddenly you realize your worst nightmare is unfolding right before your eyes. This isn't a bad dream. It's Zara's reality. A woman whose life was cut short by those she trusted more than anyone. But what makes this story even more chilling is the horrifying truth. Her own family was behind her death, pulling the strings in the most unimaginable way. The twisted catalyst? A deadly cocktail of envy, jealousy, and greed, culminating in a betrayal so shocking it will leave you speechless. Zara was a 30-year-old woman, a daughter, a wife, and a mother, with a life that seemed ordinary on the surface. But behind closed doors, there were deep-rooted issues that would eventually lead to her untimely death. Born into a family of law enforcement, her father, Esai Shabir Ahmad, had always been protective of her. She was married to Abdul Qadir, her cousin, who worked in Saudi Arabia. Zara and Abdul Qadir had a young son together, and Zara had recently found out that she was pregnant again. But Zara's return to Pakistan while pregnant with her second child would mark the beginning of a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. It was during her stay in Pakistan that Zara's family began to change. She became entangled in a web of jealousy, greed, and ultimately murder. It was in the midst of this turmoil that Zara's life was taken from her in a brutal and calculated manner. But how could anyone in her own family be capable of such a horrendous act? It was an ordinary evening, and Zara, who was 7 months pregnant, settled into her bed. The night seemed like any other, with no sign of the horror that was about to unfold. Her mother-in-law, Sugra, had long harbored resentment toward her. Zara's presence in the house, along with her husband's financial support being directed toward Zara, was a source of constant tension. As the hours passed, Zara, unaware of the looming danger, fell into a peaceful sleep. But this would be her final night. At some point during the night, Sugra, along with Zara's sister-in-law Yasmin and a hired accomplice, Numan, executed their plan. They made sure Zara would never wake up. They smothered her with a pillow, cutting off her breath, while Yasmin and Numan held her down. The act was swift, brutal, and merciless. Zara, who was supposed to be a mother of 2, was killed by the very people who should have protected her. And as the day broke, Zara's body lay lifeless. The morning after Zara's death, her father, Esai Shabir Ahmad, began to grow suspicious. Zara had been out of touch, and that wasn't like her. He knew something was wrong. When he called her, there was no answer. He rushed to the house of her in-laws, but what he encountered there was far worse than he could have ever imagined. Zara's in-laws feigned ignorance, pretending that they had no idea where Zara was. But Shabir, sensing something off, immediately contacted the police and filed a missing person report. It was only a matter of hours before the truth would come crashing down. The police investigation was a slow burn. Initially, Zara's death was thought to be a heart attack, especially given her condition during pregnancy. But as the days passed, forensic evidence suggested otherwise. Zara had been smothered. Her death wasn't a simple case of natural causes, it was murder. But who could have done this? The police began looking at Zara's family with suspicion, and it wasn't long before the chilling truth began to emerge. Zara's mother-in-law, Sugra, had been the mastermind behind it all. She was the one who had orchestrated the murder, pulling in her daughter Yasmin and Numan to help execute the plan. But why? The motive was simple: greed and jealousy. Sugra and Yasmin had grown resentful of the financial support Zara and her husband had been providing. They saw Zara as an obstacle to their control, and they would stop at nothing to remove her from the picture. But this case didn't stop at family rivalry. The investigation revealed even more shocking details. Zara's body had been dismembered. Her face had been deliberately burned, making it harder for investigators to identify her. Her body was placed in 5 bags and discarded in a remote area of Lahore, a desperate attempt to conceal the crime. As the investigation continued, the police tracked down Yasmin, who eventually broke under the pressure and confessed to her involvement. But there was still one piece of the puzzle left to complete: the involvement of Numan. The police soon discovered that he had been promised a large sum of money for his participation in the murder, and when they tracked down his financial transactions, they found traces of the payment made by Sugra herself. It was then that the real horror sank in. Zara had been betrayed by every person she trusted. Her own family had plotted and carried out her death for nothing more than greed. The twist was far from over. After the chilling confession of Zara's sister-in-law Yasmin, the real nightmare began. It was one thing to learn about a betrayal, but another to uncover the extent of the family's involvement. In a shocking turn, new evidence surfaced that would not only deepen the tragedy but also leave the public in disbelief. The perpetrators weren't the only ones hiding dark secrets. The entire community would soon find out just how deep the deception ran and how justice would ultimately unfold. With Yasmin's confession, the police had a breakthrough, but it wasn't enough to put the final pieces of the puzzle together. Yasmin, under intense pressure from the police, revealed more about the plot, but there were still questions. How did they manage to smother Zara without anyone hearing anything? And how had they managed to dispose of her body so effectively? As the investigation dug deeper, the police learned that the entire plan had been more calculated than initially thought. Zara's mother-in-law, Sugra, had orchestrated everything down to the smallest detail. But there was more to it. Yasmin revealed that the motive for Zara's murder wasn't simply greed over money, it was also jealousy. Zara had everything that Sugra had once dreamed of: a loving husband, financial stability, and respect. Over the years, resentment had been festering beneath the surface, and that final spark ignited the fatal plan. The police tracked down the movements of Sugra and Yasmin before the murder. They discovered that they had made several trips to a nearby market, buying supplies to cover up their crime. Their conversations had been meticulously planned, and they even went as far as to remove Zara's body from the house and transport it in a way that would delay discovery. But it wasn't just Yasmin's confession that had the police buzzing. The role of Numan, the hired accomplice, became clearer with each passing day. Numan, who had been promised a handsome sum for his participation, had known the family for years. He had agreed to help because of the large payment, but what he didn't realize was how dark and twisted the family dynamics truly were. Sugra's plan had been clever, or so she thought. By ensuring Zara's body was disfigured, she had hoped it would delay identification and throw off the police. But the truth began to come out in fragments, and with each new detail, the police pieced together the tragic puzzle of Zara's last moments. The investigation revealed that Sugra had been plotting for months, carefully waiting for the perfect opportunity to act. Zara's pregnancy was the final trigger. She had hoped that with the arrival of the second child, Zara would be more dependent on her and less likely to leave. But when Zara insisted on going back to Saudi Arabia with her husband and child, Sugra saw this as a betrayal. She felt abandoned. And so she hatched the plan to rid herself of Zara once and for all. With Yasmin's confession, the police learned of the exact moments leading up to the murder. How they had silently moved Zara into the bedroom, smothered her while she was asleep, and then made sure there were no signs of struggle. Everything had been executed with chilling precision. But it wasn't just the plot that had stunned the community. It was the shocking realization that Zara's family had no remorse. They were cold, calculating, and utterly merciless in their actions. Yasmin, once seen as a dutiful sister-in-law, had betrayed her own flesh and blood. As the investigation continued, the police were horrified to uncover even darker secrets about Zara's family. It wasn't just Sugra's jealousy that had led to the murder, it was also her greed. Sugra and Yasmin had hoped to gain access to Zara's bank accounts, which had been managed by her husband, Abdul Qadir. Zara had been the one sending money to support the family in Pakistan, and her sudden disappearance would have left her husband with no choice but to return home. But with Zara gone, they believed they could seize her assets and control the wealth she had brought into the family. Numan, the hired accomplice, was a pawn in their game, but his testimony was crucial. He revealed that Sugra had promised him a large sum of money, but the arrangement had been far murkier than expected. Numan had been told that he would receive payment once the job was done, but when he learned of Zara's true fate, he began to have second thoughts. By the time the police apprehended him, he was ready to talk. With all the evidence now in place, the police launched a final raid on the family. Sugra, Yasmin, and Numan were arrested, but the investigation didn't stop there. The police dug deeper into the financial transactions between Sugra and Yasmin, and it was revealed that they had been funneling money into secret accounts for years. They had used Zara as a means to gain access to the wealth she had accumulated, exploiting her kindness and devotion for their own selfish purposes. As the trial began, the shocking details of the crime played out in court. Sugra, Yasmin, and Numan were charged with murder, and their actions were deemed a betrayal of the highest order. The case was a reminder of how family dynamics, when driven by envy and greed, could lead to destruction. Zara's family, once seen as pillars of the community, were now shunned, their names forever associated with the brutal murder of a beloved woman. The community was left in disbelief. Zara, a young woman with so much potential, had been taken from them by the hands of those who should have loved her. Her death left a void that could never be filled. But in the face of such horror, there was a glimmer of justice. Zara's husband, Abdul Qadir, had returned to Pakistan after hearing the news of his wife's death. He was devastated, but he vowed to fight for his son's future and bring justice to Zara. The custody battle for Zara's son was fiercely contested, and in the end, Zara's parents were granted full custody, ensuring that her child would be raised in a loving and stable environment. In the courtroom, the judge sentenced Sugra to life imprisonment and Yasmin to 25 years for their role in Zara's murder. Numan, the accomplice, was also sentenced to 15 years in prison. The case, which had shocked the nation, was finally brought to a close.